Yeah, so the conventional wisdom, of course, of 2016 is that the polling was wildly off, that it overestimated Hillary Clinton's, probability of winning and delivered an election night surprise to all of America. And although part of that narrative is true, it was an election night surprise and most of America was expecting a Hillary Clinton win, the idea that the polling was wildly off is pretty dramatically overstated, especially when we're looking at the big national surveys. And a lot of that has to do with just the way the media operates in terms of reporting polling results. So if you are looking at a poll result being reported on television or in the paper, down at the corner of the little graph, it will say MOE plus or minus and then have some kind of number, usually 3 or 4%. And what that means is the margin of error, of course. And although the media doesn't talk about margin of error, what it really actually means is it's a window of uncertainty of the polling, right? So, for example, some of these national polls that had Clinton up 2 or 3 percentage points, which incidentally, once the votes were counted, was pretty accurate. Even if they had not been, even if it was a situation where she had lost the popular vote by a couple of points, that still would have been in those polling, margin of errors. And so, margin of error is a very difficult thing to talk about in a soundbite. I do a lot of media, so no one ever hardly asks me about margin of error because it's just not conducive, and it's hard to explain to the listener. Now, the one time you will hear it talked about is when there's a big gap between two candidates or something. I'll say, well, this is way outside the margin of error. But they never really talk about, a 45 to 42% survey really means it's a dead heat. It could mean that. To, add on to that, there was polling that was wildly inaccurate, right? We're looking at some of these state polls that came out of states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. None of them predicting those states to even be competitive, let alone going into the Trump camp, right? And that led people like myself that study the science of campaigns and elections to wonder about Trump's decision to spend time in Michigan that final week of the campaign, because the polling had never showed that state being competitive for him. And, I will say to your viewers that this is the problem with polling is it is a science, but at one point it is a theoretical exercise. And that theoretical exercise involves estimating the electorate, the composition of the electorate, who's going to show up to vote and who isn't. And up in those polls, what you find is that the polling estimates were based on 2012 and 2008 turnout of certain demographic groups and how those groups break down in vote preference. And so two very big Democratic groups are millennial voters and minority voters, and both of them underperformed their turnout in 2016. And with millennials, there was a higher rate of defection than amongst the general population for the third-party candidates. So that really did cost Clinton. Here at Christopher Newport University, we're happy to host, and I'm the assistant director of the Judy Ford Wason Center for Public Policy, and we undertook a lot of polling for the presidential race. We did a series of 6 polls, one benchmark to get a sense of the race before the debates, and then we ran tracking surveys throughout the length of the general election. And what we found in our surveys was a race that started off about 10 percentage points in favor of Clinton, and then narrowed a little bit, and then or actually expanded a whole bunch after the first debate in the Access Hollywood tapes, and then narrowed again. And what we were expecting on election day was a Clinton lead of about 5 or 6 points. That was what our data said, and that's exactly what happened.